you're running through the hall and somebody tells you, hey, we have to do this or this has to happen. And we all see squirrels, right? You get called to this room, this happens, that happens. Well, now it's all put in this database and it's there for me. I can go back at it at my leisure at a certain time or what have you, but I have everything right there for myself to follow up on it. And not only do I follow up on it, but I can show in data that it's been followed up on and when.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now, turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Carolyn Hooks and Tracy Farley, both of the Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters in Norfolk, Virginia. Carol Hooks is the Sterile Processing Program Manager at CHKD, and aside from her work as a sterile processing professional, Carolyn has spent most of her adult life working in perioperative services. At 17, Carolyn entered the Navy as a hospital corpsman and trained as an operating room technician. She scrubbed her first surgery at the age of 18, and 2 decades later, she took on the challenge of managing the sterile processing department, where she learned about the important work happening behind the scenes and the value of a strong support department for surgery. Carolyn soon became involved with the local chapter of ISHM and became a certified manager through CBSPD. Her passion is in bridging the divide between sterile processing and the operating room, and she specializes in problem solving using root cause analysis and PDSA, which is what this episode is all about. And speaking of bridging the divide between sterile processing and the operating room, joining Carolyn on this interview is Tracy Farley. She is the surgical program manager at CHKD. She entered the healthcare profession as a volunteer EMT, and soon after nursing school, she began her career at CHKD in the emergency department. Her nursing journey led her to perioperative services as a PACU nurse. Tracy's passion for perioperative services has allowed her to advance her career as well as provide performance improvement measures within the many hospital divisions throughout CHKD. She is a member of the Association of Perioperative Registered Nurses, or AORN, and as a lifelong learner, Tracy obtained her BSN from Virginia Commonwealth University. She is currently a student in the MBA in Healthcare Management program at Western Governors University. Tracy has been successful in creating and managing projects and coordinating multidisciplinary teams in an effort to improve quality and safety throughout the organization. She specializes at getting everybody to the table and on the same page. And Hank, I'm telling you, their bios really describe what this episode is all about. It's about bridging the divide, collaborating, and a story about Tracy pushing really hard to bring Carol to the table and get on the same page with some new technology and some metrics.
Anytime, Justin, we can talk to folks in the field, doing the work, encountering the challenges and finding solutions, that's an episode that I'm all about. I love talking to vendor partners. I love talking to entrepreneurs and inventors, but nothing really beats the heart of the podcast of Beyond Clean, talking to folks in the field who are working together to find solutions to help their teams fight dirty. So I'm super excited for this interview.
All right. Well, we're going to be right back after a short break with Carol Hooks and Tracy Farley from CHKD.
You're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Today, we are speaking with Carolyn Hooks and Tracy Farley, both from Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters in Norfolk, Virginia. And Carol, I'm going to start with you. You're the sterile processing manager. Why don't you give the listening audience a little bit of background on yourself?
Well, I started in the profession of perioperative services back in 1984. I was basically just a kid. I went to school in the Navy to be a surgical tech and scrubbed my first case when I was 18. Once I got out of the Navy, I worked as a surgical tech for a little over 20 years. And at some point, our sterile processing manager just sort of walked out. And I said, hey, I'd like to give that a try. At least I'll cover it in the meantime. And I've never looked back. And that was in 2003. So I've been doing this for I think it's about 17 years. And it's much more challenging than the OR.
Oh, well, I guess we'll see what Tracy has to say about that. Tracy, you're the surgical program manager there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
I started at the Children's Hospital right after graduation in the emergency department, and that was 21 years ago. And I've been in perioperative services on and off for the last 10 plus years. And I think we all work really well together. We have a great team dynamics going on, so we can say things like that.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things, you just said it, the team dynamics, but one of the things that I think is great about this interview is that we really get to show that collaboration between the two departments. And we've talked a lot about it on previous episodes, but having you on at the same time to talk about a recent success story that really combines technology and some creativity and also a way to utilize that technology to document and create some accountability. I think a lot of our audience is really going to enjoy this episode because, I know that the purpose of the documentation and creating accountability is not a punitive or finger pointing effort. And I think, boy, the more that we can give people tools and techniques for maintaining that healthy partnership is really helpful to the industry. So before we get started with kind of talking about the technology, I'd like to paint the picture for everyone, which is what are some of the challenges that were facing your department prior to implementing this technology, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes here?
Well, Justin, you just mentioned finger pointing, and that's probably one of the number one challenges. Everybody kind of wants to blame each other, but nobody wants to stop at that moment and talk about what's wrong right then. So I typically talk about the ooh moment. And what that means for me is I could be walking down the hallway and I see someone from the OR and I say good morning. And the next minute they're saying, ooh, I need to tell you about the tray that I used last week. It had all dull scissors. And I say, well, what tray was it? And they'll say it was the general surgery, minor general tray. Well, which minor general tray was it? Well, I don't know. So a week later, I find out that there was a problem. I don't know what tray the problem was with. And next thing I know, I'm supposed to follow up with it. Meanwhile, the doctor's saying I get the same dull scissors back over and over and over again. So using the technology is something that could help us move forward and right away fix the problem. So, and the same thing happens on our end. If somebody brings in a tray that doesn't have point of use cleaning or proper point of use cleaning, I might find out about it 2 or 3 days later, and I cannot pinpoint where it came from. So we're not communicating in a timely basis.
So Tracy, from the perioperative perspective, then obviously, like we just heard from Carol, the impact on the sterile processing team and the perspective of the challenges around that. But what were you hearing in the operating room again prior to tackling the changes?
One of the things that Carol likes to call it too is like the morning chaos when everyone's running around when first starts are happening. We're trying to identify some of those areas because the dissatisfiers for the surgeons, for us in and out of the room, increased room traffic, worrying about surgical site infections. So we're kind of hoping that this tool is going to help us pinpoint was the item not even on the preference card, and that's the reason why we're going in and out of the room. Or the case, for instance, I think we had a case today where we have one of our surgeons who'll come up to the desk and say, well, it's not really a cranny. He just wants one certain piece of equipment out of the tray, and we've pulled an entire tray that's going to be processed for one instrument.
Right. Yeah, that's, oh man, I think we got a lot of folks out there who feel exactly the pain of that statement, right? In so many ways, workflow wise and everything else. So that's huge. Well, I'm curious, in moving kind of from the high level impact down to the team level, and Carol, you can kind of start with this. Inside the sterile processing department, obviously, if there's finger pointing happening outside, that has an impact on the team dynamics inside. So can you talk about prior to the change, prior to the accountability move and shift, what was the chatter, what was the feeling in sterile processing when they encountered or had to deal with some of that morning chaos, for instance?
Well, I think the first thing we felt was frustration, because we feel like we worked so hard the night before and the day before to get ready for these cases. We're following what the procedure cards say. We go to all this trouble, we pull these cases, and then the next morning, a lot of the things that they're asking for weren't on the pick sheets, or a lot of the issues weren't anticipated.
So the frustration is welling inside of, we thought we did what was asked of us.
Mm-hmm.
So what's wrong, right? So then Tracy, then from the operating room, obviously there's a whole nother set of considerations among the team. I guess, if you could bring us in to those first case starts and the impact, that some of these challenges would have on the team in that operating room. Like, what would it look like? What would that conversation be?
I mean, I really think some of the problem actually really starts from the time these cases are actually posted, which is kind of a whole nother issue that we're trying to work on as well. But you have surgeons that are delayed start, and that just kind of trickles the effect for the entire day. Then we have unhappy parents because their child's not going to the OR on time. And it's just kind of a trickle-down effect when we can't get started on time with the first cases. And of course, very unhappy surgeons that, are saying that they don't have everything they need, they don't have the equipment, they don't have the team, et cetera.
And that snowballs, right? So with
Yes.
unhappy surgeons become unhappy circulators, become unhappy, sterile processing technicians, right? It just continues to grow.
On top of that snowball, there's also there's perspective. So there's one sterile processing group, but there's 12 rooms. So each room is having their own chaos, and we're having to try to manage all that. So yeah, it can be quite frustrating and pretty tough.
I think we've done a good job laying out what the challenge was. And the interesting part about this story is I know anyone in the industry listening to this, they're nodding their head saying, yep, I know exactly what that feels like. Yep, I've seen that. Yep, we've gone through that. So hopefully I think at this point now, folks are saying, okay, so we've got those same challenges. So now let's hear about how you confronted them. The tool or the program is called RedCap. So I'm wondering, Tracy, if you can kick us off, give us a high level overview on what RedCap is and how it ended up becoming one of the tools that your team is using to address these challenges.
Well, RedCap is just a web-based database that was created by Vanderbilt University that's free for nonprofits to use. It's very user-friendly. You can create surveys, be able to collect information, and then the surveys can even be taken by your staff or by your surgeons by using just a simple QR code scanner. So everything goes immediately into that database. There's no paperwork sitting around that's going to upset anybody, and the only people that have access to the data are the managers.
Oh, so that's really a key part of that right there is the anonymity of the data. When you're talking about eliminating that finger pointing, only restricting the data's access to people that are focused on process improvement rather than, maybe some disruptive culture potential will have access to the data. I think that's excellent. I also really like that I've seen a lot of audit sheets that are paper-based, but then when you try to aggregate that information into something that's reportable, somebody has to manually enter that data. And that usually, based on today's staffing models, is just not feasible. It might work for certain targeted approaches, but what's great about what you're talking about is it sounds to me like the RedCap solution is a little bit more open-ended and you're able to use it for lots of different reasons. And it's capturing that aggregate data. So what were some of the problems that you were using this technology to solve? And I know we're here to talk about a very specific one today, but maybe even talk about a broader application other than just point of use cleaning and being able to collect data on that.
I was going to say, one of the things that we tried to focus on is just areas of excellence, be it the room staff, and even giving the surgeons the opportunity to give kudos to the staff, and then any areas of improvement.
And Carol, what about you? I want to talk about the point of use, but have you utilized this solution to help improve data and metrics in other areas as well?
Actually, one thing I'd like to say is what Tracy said. What I'm really impressed with is my own staff. They've been using it actually to point out the good things that the OR staff are doing. And I'm really excited about that. For me personally, it keeps me from lingering on my follow-up. So you're running through the hall and somebody tells you, hey, we have to do this or this has to happen. And we all see squirrels, right? You get called to this room, this happens, that happens. Well, now it's all put in this database and it's there for me. I can go back at it at my leisure at a certain time or what have you, but I have everything right there for myself to follow up on it. And not only do I follow up on it, but I can show in data that it's been followed up on and when.
Mm. And you can show some trending, I take it. So as you're not only you, I should say, as your staff and you both are focusing on the good things that are being done and the positivity, you're also able to show, I would suspect with the data, that positive attitude actually increases compliance with the desired behavior. Would you say that that's kind of what you've seen in response to showing people the good work that they're doing, that it actually raises the level of consistency with which they do it?
Let's see, we've got about 3 weeks of data. Tracy and I have been looking at it. We have not reported it out to anyone yet, but by looking at it, you're absolutely right. We can see trends on where the positivities are, and that's what we plan to do with this. We plan to use the positive points to show the OR what's working well, why it's working well, and hoping that it will move things in the better direction.
So, Carol, we've been talking a little bit about the problems that this technology can address, but can you walk us through, like, what does it actually look like for users to implement or use this RedCap tool in the department, in the workflow, from the day-to-day workflow that they encounter?
It's a lot easier than I thought it would be. Actually, I think I avoided Tracy on a regular basis for about 3 months every time she talked about RedCap. I'm like, I do not have time for this. I have so much to do. And she kept persevering. And finally, she came to my department with this piece of paper that had a QR code on it. And she said, come with me. And she said, get your phone. You literally just put your phone up to the QR code, hit your camera, and then a survey pops up. And we can customize a survey any way we want it. In our particular case, we have areas of excellence, which is surgical tray, case cart, and procedure card. That's what we chose to do. And then there's areas needing improvement, and you just do a checkbox really quickly. And if you don't even have time to do that, you can just check the date and the room and take a picture of the case cart. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. In this case, in some cases here lately, it has been. So it's really good that my staff, not only are they taking pictures of those ungodly case carts that come through, but they're taking pictures of the ones that are done correctly.
Yeah, I love the positive approach that's coming from this. And one thing I can tell you, Carol, is that we met, or I shouldn't say we met, but I would say one of the times that we worked closely together was you asked me to come speak at one of your conferences for the local chapter and talk about point of use cleaning. And then I came back and presented a program to the staff at your hospital. And I think it was very well received. It's one of my favorite presentations that I've done. And I love it because of the collaboration between the two departments. And so can you talk about, it sounds like at first you were sort of avoiding RedCap and then you found it to be very easy to use. When did it enter into the equation around point of use? And I think you kind of just described it a little bit. You were taking pictures of the case carts when they come down and you're documenting both, the right way and maybe some opportunities for improvement. But when did it really occur to you that it could help in this specific area where, I think everybody across the country could use some help in operationalizing improvements around point of use cleaning.
Well, I'll tell you, I am the absolute typical SPD manager. I am spending my time putting fires out, running here, running there. I'm very, very busy. And I've got this nerd that keeps talking to me about this database that she has, RedCap. I don't even know what it is. To be honest with you, I didn't know what a QR code was. And yeah, Tracy, that sounds great. It sounds great. And I'm thinking that, my gosh, I don't even get this stuff. I don't understand. And again, like I said, she just kept picking at me and asking me questions. By the time she asked me all the questions and, I was sort of like frustrated, she comes to my department and then she just demonstrated it. And this light bulb went off. And I said, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been asking for. I just didn't know that that's what she was offering. And it's perfect. We showed it to my staff, or she showed it to my staff, and they were much smarter than me. They were like, well, QR codes, I do that all the time at the restaurants. They got it right away. It was a no-brainer. It was me. I was the problem. I just didn't understand what a great process this was.
Now, Tracy, I want to take an opportunity here because what you did, there's a lot of folks out there in the industry who feel like they have a solution to a problem, but they encounter Carol's, and instead of continuing to push, they say, okay, yeah, you don't want it. That's fine. I'll quit. But you continue to push, potentially because you had a relationship with Carol. So I don't want to steal your thunder on what the cause here, what prompted you to continue to push. I'll let you tell that story. But I think it's important to share that insight to folks in the industry who maybe it's RedCap, maybe it's some other software, it's a new process, but they're committed to the solution and they encounter pushback. So what kept you pushing and picking and continuing to put this on Carol's radar until you got that solution in where you knew it needed to be?
We've been trying to work on different projects as far as trying to figure out this whole having what we need in the room traffic, making sure we have the right equipment. And it just kind of all fell together. Like we could at least just kind of start, and it sounds like in the middle, but not at the beginning. But we figured maybe in the middle, if we could figure out what was going on, then from there we could kind of work our way backwards, which is a little different. I think I've learned a lot from Carol, so I try to just go and watch and listen. I've done some gimbal walks in her department, just trying to learn, and I guess just persistence and bugging her.
Well,
she knew what I needed more than I
did. Right.
It's teamwork.
So now we've got 3 weeks worth of data, and with each passing day, more data points come in. But, so far, Carol, you've said that y'all have taken a look at the data and you've seen some trends already with the impact of the positive, shout outs or those excellence points that come in there. Is there anything else that you're already seeing in this data and with this tool that is signaling that, hey, yeah, this is what we need. This is going to help us get to where we need to go?
Absolutely. One of the things that just me personally that I've seen is every SPD department is what keeps us awake are bioburden events. And we know that bioburden events is something that it begins on the surgical field. And it typically happens in your heavy orthopedic cases. And that's where I can show right now with the data that I have that point of use cleaning is not happening. So I can hopefully pull the reports, use the pictures, and show we're getting garbage in, so there's going to be garbage out. We need to start thinking about how we treat our orthopedic instruments, our spine instruments from the case. They're just dumping them on us, with dried blood and absolutely no gel and no water. So that's something I can finally show pictures of and demonstrate.
Well, you said it. Garbage in, garbage out. And what's interesting about that is that's usually something that's used to describe technology or data and not necessarily a process, right? But it's the same. It's going to get computed in some way, and every input impacts the output. And so when we talk about technology, and we're kind of coming to a close here in the interview, but when we talk about the technology, it comes up all the time on this show. Like, we just want to see more technology, more automation. We want to really bring the industry a little bit more into some of the best practices and the lessons learned from other industries. And so what I'd like to hear from the two of you is what kind of encouragement you would give to other departments, and specifically on how to leverage technology to improve their teams, because sometimes people are afraid of technology. They may feel uncomfortable with technology today. And then at the same time, there may be managers or other staff people that are comfortable with technology, but they know that their coworkers may not be comfortable with technology. So how do you give that encouragement to say, you know what, you might be uncomfortable, but this is going to make things better and it's not going to be as hard as you think it is? Let's start with Tracy.
No, I just think the proof's in the pudding. Carol mentioned the pictures, and the pictures are worth 1,000 words. I think it gives our staff a voice. It might be that the surgeon's saying that these scissors aren't working, and the first assist is saying the scissors work perfectly fine. So having that platform to where they can communicate to SPD, that's really, I think, going to be instrumental in us trying to figure out where we do have maybe some areas that we can work upon. We definitely need to work on our point of use cleaning. Carol showed me a picture today, actually, from one of our orthopedic surgeries. So there's definitely some work to be done, but it's nice to actually have the documentation to kind of show the validity of concerns.
And Carol, how about you? You were resistant to the technology, maybe more from a time and having something else on your plate in terms of a project, but how would you encourage others to adopt technology for the success of their departments and the collaboration between the OR and the SPD?
Well, I would say, first of all, make friends with your local nerd, right, Tracy? Open your mind, because for me, I was thinking I was going to be spending hours upon hours at my computer trying to do all this. It turns out she created the easiest way for me to do this. I mean, I was having to beg my staff to take pictures and send them to me. Well, now they just have this very simple way to constantly give me this data. So you open your mind and don't think it's as hard as you think it will be. They're coming up with easier ways to do things, easier than what you think you've been doing. And the other thing is, data is the ultimate answer. There's so many things that can go wrong, and we know this. And typically, when things go wrong, it tends to be our area that has to do a lot of answering for that. And we end up answering after the fact constantly, trying to say what we're going to do better. But let's show the data. The data may show that it's not as bad as you think. So if you have that data, you've got some armor or some ammunition. So if you can find a way to get data, you're going to be in a better place.
Excellent, ladies. Well, good work together, but also really great work on this podcast. And thank you for coming on and sharing your success story, but also sharing it in a way that you're continuing to collaborate together on this interview, which I think is great role modeling. So I really want to throw some kudos both your ways. And Tracy and Carol, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
That was Carolyn Hooks and Tracy Farley, sterile processing and surgical program managers, respectively, at Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters in Norfolk, Virginia. And Hank, I mentioned that I had an opportunity not only to present for Carol's local Isham chapter, but also for her facility on point of use cleaning. And so she's been keeping me abreast of how things have been going, and then recently sent over the email about the success that they had with this new technology and what an improvement it had made. But I didn't realize that she was going to be inviting her counterpart from surgical services or peri-op, and how much they had worked together on this. And I really think that that's the highlight of this episode is the collaboration. We talk about it all the time, is getting outside the silos of the department, pulling in other departments. And we've had a lot of different interviews, some talking about infection control, et cetera. But this one is a success story that I think really everybody who listens to Beyond Clean can take away and really put into practice very quickly, at least in terms of attitude and approach, because there's no getting around working with your counterparts in surgical services.
Right. Yeah. Try not working with them and see how far and how long you get with that. But what I'll add is there's a third collaborative piece here. We're talking about collaborating between the OR and sterile processing, but we've also talked about collaborating with technology. And if I was to add another theme, to Carol's comments, it is the huge value there. And the chicken or the egg, for this interview first came that collaborative push really from Tracy, who said, I'm going to work with you, Carol, and we're going to work together and we're going to have a solution. But then what she brought in was this technology. And I just love the way that all of that collaboration really dovetailed with each other and had turned out a solution that they're already seeing huge results just a couple of weeks in. So I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with the team and seeing it in a couple of months, all of the additional feedback and success stories that they have to share.
Yeah, it's great because the data is so new and it's obviously feeding their energy and their enthusiasm, and it's making the project exciting. I'm excited to see some data over time and just the impact of that. I think I actually asked a question during the interview about how the data has fueled more positive approaches and just gotten everybody's eye on the prize. And truth is, they really haven't enough runtime for that yet. I do want to say before we close out this episode is we found out as we finished recording with Carol and Tracy that the day that this episode will be releasing, which will be January 11th, is Tracy Farley's birthday. So we do want to wish her a very happy birthday. And again, congratulations to both of them for working so well together and also for being willing to share their success story with the Beyond Clean listening audience.
And if you want to hear some bonus content of Justin singing happy birthday, make sure to download the Beyond Clean mobile app. No, just kidding about that. But maybe next time when it's my birthday, we'll see.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, or by downloading our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.